Hey, what's going on, everybody? Brent Hayden here, coming at you on this Christmas Eve afternoon, talking the 5 game slate around the association for Christmas Day. I want to wish everybody a Merry Christmas before we dive into anything. I want to thank all of you that have subscribed to my channel and have subscribed to my daily content and projections. If you're not already, subscribe to my content projections or following me on Twitter. My Twitter handle at BrentHayden1 is in the description down below. While you're over on Twitter, you can send me a direct message, find out how you can get access for a Christmas special, 25% off for the rest of the season, or you can head over to my Patreon page, patreon.com/BrentHayden, and take advantage of the end of the month tiers available over there. But without further ado, let's go ahead and hop into the slate. The first game that we're going to talk about, Milwaukee at New York Knicks, Madison Square Garden on Christmas. Doesn't get much better than that. A pretty fun game to target. This one, hopefully the Knicks can keep it close. Hopefully playing on Christmas Day will motivate them a little bit. Milwaukee, 10-point favorites in this one, 228.5 over under. Ersan Ilyasova is out. Mitchell Robinson is out for this game. Still a lot to like, though. Going to start on the Milwaukee side of things, and that starts with Giannis Antetokounmpo. Obviously, he is one of the top options on the slate. He comes in at 10-7 on DraftKings, 11-5 on Fanduel. That price on DraftKings is just way too cheap here. Honestly, DraftKings pricing today is just, or for Christmas Day, is just really, really bad. A lot of guys that are just way underpriced, Giannis being one of those here. Obviously, a great play. Owns a solid 29.8% usage rate on the season, 17.6% rebounding percentage, and 29.2% assist percentage. We love targeting Giannis in games against teams that lack rim protection. And with Mitchell Robinson being out, you're going to get a lot of Enes Kanter trying to protect the rim, and we know that is good. The Knicks, 65.3% field goal percentage allowed at the rim. They're also allowing opponents to take almost 40% of their shots at the rim. So this is just a fantastic spot here for Giannis, who actually has had a ton of success in 2 games against the Knicks already this season, averaging 68 fantasy points in just under 40 minutes. We expect the minutes and production to be there for him, assuming the game stays close. Obviously, that Miami game was a tough one for them, but it was a back-to-back after some travel, and highlighted that he might struggle in that game, but prior to that had been really, really consistent, getting you 50 plus fantasy points most nights. So he's someone that I have a ton of interest in here, and I think he's going to be overlooked. But outside of Giannis, Malcolm Brogdon, a guy that I absolutely love targeting, he should be fine in this game. He came out and said he was fine to play last game, but it was more of a precaution that he was going to sit out for rest. Malcolm Brogdon, a guy I love targeting in cash, but I really love his DraftKings price at 5K in tournaments. Has potential to get on top of that salary here. He is 5,500 on FanDuel, pretty appealing there as well. It's just a really, really strong spot for him. He's someone else that we like to target whenever teams lack rim protection, because he takes a decent amount of shots at the rim as well. 54% of his shots come at the rim. The Knicks are also allowing opponents to shoot 37.1% from 3, where 33% of his shots come from. Malcolm Brogdon, one of my favorite affordable ways to get exposure to this game. I don't hate taking a shot on Chris Middleton in tournaments. Still mired in a shooting slump. Did break out a little bit last game. Had a strong outing. Actually, the last couple of games has been pretty solid, but he's someone that I do kind of like in tournaments. And then Eric Bledsoe, someone really, really to pay a close eye on, especially on FanDuel at 7,300. Point guard on FanDuel is a little bit weird with the way the pricing breaks down. Eric Bledsoe, 6,800 on DraftKings, really appealing as well. Has struggled in 3 straight games, but prior to that had been on a little bit of a hot streak, and has torched the Knicks twice this season already, averaging 48 fantasy points per game against them. The Knicks struggling against point guards. They rank 23rd in defensive efficiency to the position, so I do like Eric Bledsoe here. And then one of my favorite affordable center options, especially on DraftKings at 4,300, is going to be Brook Lopez. This is a spot The Knicks allowing opposing centers to shoot 35% from three. Lopez, a guy we know likes to light it up from beyond the arc. Brook Lopez, a guy I have a ton of interest in at 4,300 on DraftKings, should be able to easily pay off that salary whenever he's going to be facing off against Enes Kanter for most of the game. Looking at a couple of strong Fanduel plays from the Milwaukee side of things, you can look at George Hill and DJ Wilson, guys that are under 4K that you can look at as punt options. On the Knicks side of things, this gets a little bit murky because Alonzo Trier is expected to suit up. We do have Damian Dotson who came back, but Mitchell Robinson is still out. That being said, Emmanuel Mudiay has entrenched himself as the team's number one point guard, has topped 30 minutes in 8 of the last 10 games. Obviously, some of those games were before Dotson and Trier and Trey Burke all came back, but he still managed to keep that role as they're working Trey Burke and Dotson and Trier kind of back into the rotation. 6,900 on DraftKings for Emmanuel Mudiay. He is 6,400 on FanDuel. I like him in tournaments. Obviously, not a fantastic matchup. He can have some success here, as Milwaukee does, again, struggle to defend in the paint in the mid-range, where he takes about 35% of his shots. And he's a guy that has upside, can get on top of that salary. I like him in tournaments. He's going to be very low owned in this spot, so Mudiay a strong tournament option. I mentioned Dotson coming back. Last game he served as the backup for Tim Hardaway Jr. and Kevin Knox. He rotated those two positions. He's a little bit interesting in this spot. 3,800 on DraftKings, 3,800 on FanDuel. I like him more on FanDuel because you can drop his score if he struggles in the spot. But he has torched the Bucks in 2 games this season, playing 32 minutes, 31.6 fantasy points. Obviously, his minutes have not been high since he came back, but 22 and 16 minutes in the last 2 games. He could get a few extra in the spot, I think, especially if this game does go small, and he does kind of have the skill set to have some success here. Takes 36% of his shots in the paint in the mid-range. 41% of his shots come from 3. That's important to note because Milwaukee is doing a good job of limiting opponent 3-point shooting. They're only allowing 35.8% on 3-point attempts this season, but they're allowing a ton of those attempts, 36 3-point attempts per game. So he could actually have some success here. I absolutely love him as a tournament option in this spot. Tim Hardaway Jr. is fine. He's not a guy that I really, really like in this spot, but in tournaments, again, he's going to be someone that's low on, going to play a ton of minutes, take a ton of shots. So he's fine as a tournament play here. I'm probably going to be spending my salary elsewhere, though. There's some other guys in the same price range that I like a little bit more. I do absolutely love Kevin Knox at his price, especially on DraftKings at 5,600. Continues to play a ton of minutes. Again, I've mentioned this game could go small. That means he could get some minutes at the 4 and the 3, which would bode pretty well for him. He's taking a ton of shots. Struggled in the last game late in that game. He actually scored 17 of his 24 points in the first quarter, went 1 of 9 from the floor over the final 3 periods. Could have just been some fatigue. Given that there's been a few days of rest, I think that's going to be behind him. And this is a pretty strong spot here for Kevin Knox. Milwaukee does rank 21st in defensive efficiency to small forwards. They're allowing him to score 20.8 points, 8.3 rebounds. They're allowing him to shoot 42% from the floor and 38% from 3. They're also allowing 9.3 free throw attempts per game, and so that's pretty appealing. Outside of Knox, I really love Vonleh. Noah Vonleh in this spot could actually get some extra run, especially with Mitchell Robinson being out and Enes Kanter being someone that could get in some foul trouble given all the drives to the rim that Giannis is going to take. That being said, Noah Vonleh is someone that he himself could get in some foul trouble here. But Noah Vonleh, 5,200 on DraftKings and 6,400 on FanDuel. A pretty strong spot for him. Pretty solid cash game play in this spot, I think, given the upside that he has. And then Enes Kanter, a strong tournament option, but I'm going to be looking elsewhere in cash tonight. Moving on, Oklahoma City at Houston, the 2 o'clock game, 3 o'clock depending on what coast you're on. Maybe even earlier than that if you're on the West Coast. Houston, 1.5 point favorites, 220 over under. CP3 and James Ennis are out, and Terrence Ferguson is questionable for this game. Austin Rivers expected to suit up for the Rockets, unfortunately not in the player pool tonight, so not really someone that we can look at. James Harden averaging 39.7 points while topping 30 points in 6 straight games. Paul George has been just on fire. His fifth 30 point, he's coming off his fifth 30-point effort in 6 games, averaging 34.3 points during that stretch. Westbrook, coming off a pretty strong stretch, has recorded triple doubles in 3 of the past 4 games. Had a strong game against Minnesota, but had failed to reach the 20-point mark in 5 straight games before that. He did average 29 points, 9.3 assists in 3 games against the Rockets last season. He does kind of hate the Rockets. Clint Capella, coming off another strong outing, has 3 20-point outings in his past 5 games. And Steven Adams, coming off a bad game against Minnesota, but averaging 16.5 rebounds over the previous 2 games. Looking at the Houston side of things first, obviously it starts and ends with James Harden. Revenge game. So there's that. He has not really taken out a whole lot of revenge on Oklahoma City in the past. As a matter of fact, looking at his history, he's eclipsed 60 fantasy points in just 7 of his 22 games against Oklahoma City. But whenever you take CP3 out, he is obviously the lone source of playmaking here. In 263 minutes this season alone, Harden 48% usage rate, 1.94 fantasy points per minute. If you take that back to last season, all the way back to last season, 42% usage rate, 1.67 fantasy points per minute. So still some pretty strong production. James Harden, obviously in a tough matchup, Oklahoma City's second best defense in the NBA with a 102.0 defensive rating, but that usage is going to be really, really tough to overlook. I do like James Harden a decent amount, especially over here on DraftKings. 10-9, pretty appealing. 12-4 on Fanduel, a little less appealing, but he's still a very, very strong option in this spot here tonight. Going to play a ton of minutes, going to take a ton of shots, going to have the ball in his hand a whole heck of a lot, and it's just really, really tough to not consider him, especially with the way DraftKings pricing is tonight. I don't really like Eric Gordon, even though he's in the starting lineup, taking a ton of shots. Obviously, with Austin Rivers being there, that could eat into a few of his shots, and he's just not someone at his price tag, $5,800 on DraftKings, $6K on FanDuel, that I really think has a ton of upside in the spot. It's obviously a tough matchup again against the second best defense in the NBA. If you want to sprinkle him into some tournaments, feel free. He should be really, really, really low owned in this spot. I do have a lot of interest in PJ Tucker, just too cheap, I think, for the amount of minutes he's playing. Again, a tough matchup against Oklahoma City. But he's topped 35 minutes in 8 of the last 10 games, has topped 25 fantasy points in 4 of the last 5. He has a consistent role on this team, again, playing a ton of minutes, and in cash games, the minutes are just really tough to overlook. Obviously, the upside is a little concerning. The Washington game was a little bit of an aberration as far as what he was able to do, but 16 rebounds against the Spurs, that's pretty impressive. So I really like PJ Tucker as a cash value here. Clint Capella, 1.37 fantasy points per minute with a 20% usage rate. Dating back to last season when you take Chris Paul off the floor, it is a very tough matchup against Oklahoma City, one of the best rebounding and interior defenses in the NBA. That being said, he's going to be really, really low owned in this spot, I think, tonight. 7,400 on DraftKings. He is 9,200 on FanDuel. He's off limits for me on FanDuel, even in like large field tournaments, but on DraftKings, that $7,400 price tag, pretty appealing. And if he can get you 36 minutes, maybe, has upside in this spot. I think Gerald Green, Daniel House, guys that are going to garner some ownership from people that don't realize Austin Rivers is expected to play. You can use them on FanDuel where their price tag's 4K. And let's see. Gerald Green is 3,600. Daniel House is 3,500. You can use those guys where those price tags are cheap. That's basically FanDuel where you're punting, but outside of that, I don't really have interest here. On the Oklahoma City side of things, obviously we need to talk about Paul George, who's just been so good over the past 6 games. He shot 52% from the floor, 49% from 3. averaging 9.5 rebounds, 4.7 assists, 2 steals, and 34.3 points per game. Something that I don't think a lot of people realize. Over the last 10 games, Paul George has led the team in usage at 28.5%, outclassing Westbrook at 27.2%. It's really tough spot here for Paul George. Houston ranks 10th in defensive efficiency to small forwards on the season. They're limiting what they're able to do from beyond the arc. A lot of PJ Tucker defense there. It's still a somewhat appealing spot here, though. I think the recent hot streak could inflate his ownership, and that does have me a little concerned, especially in tournaments where you can get Russell Westbrook on DraftKings for just a few hundred more. But given how good he's been recently, it's really tough to overlook that. Obviously, we know the minutes are going to be there, and the last time these teams played, Russell did not suit up. Paul George, 35 minutes, 57 fantasy points in that matchup. Looking at Russell Westbrook, I mentioned really cheap price, 10-3 on DraftKings for a guy that's basically like a 50 fantasy point floor most nights. He's 11-3 on Fanduel. This is a intriguing spot here for him. He takes 42% of his shots at the rim. Rockets allowing 67.4% field goal shooting at the rim. Again, I do think Paul George is going to be a popular option here, given how hot he has been recently, and that has me really, really interested in Russell Westbrook as a pivot here. Just really tough to overlook him in this spot, so I really like Russell Westbrook. Dennis Schroeder, intriguing tournament option, I think, here, especially if we see Terrence Ferguson miss this game. Schroeder is 4,900 on DraftKings, 5,500 on FanDuel. Pretty appealing. He's going to play mid to upper 20s. He's going to spend a lot of time alongside Westbrook, which does hurt his upside a little bit. But he does take 33% of his shots at the rim. Houston obviously lacking rim protection, but he also ranks 4th on the team in points in the paint at 6.9 per game, and Houston giving up 51.4 points in the paint. I have some interest in Dennis Schroeder, especially in tournaments, especially on DraftKings at 4,900. Jeremy Grant, one of my favorite value plays, pretty much every single night, continues to play a lot of minutes, continues to take a decent amount of shots, has upside, has a little bit of upside, not a ton, but in this matchup, I really, really, really like him here. Shooting 39% from, or Houston is allowing power forwards to shoot 48.3% from the floor, along with 39.9% from three. 33% of Jeremy Grant's field goal attempts are three-pointers. Has some upside here. Jeremy Grant, one of my favorite cheap ways to get exposure to this game. And then we have to talk about Steven Adams. Did struggle last game against the Wolves, but the Rockets giving up 13.8 second chance points per game, 51.4 points in the paint. Pretty big boost to Adams here. Consistently a strong cash game option, but does have tournament upside. Looking at the next game, we have Philly at Boston. Aaron Baines is out. Wilson Chandler is questionable for this game. Boston 3.5 point favorites, 223 over under in this game. Joel Embiid recorded 3 straight double-doubles and 5 in his last 6 games. Has taken a little bit of reduction hit recently with Jimmy Butler around. JJ Redick coming off a 4-5 3-point shooting night after going 13 for 49 over his previous 7 games. And Kyrie Irving, a little bit of home road thing here, averages 23.9 points on 52.9% shooting and 46% shooting from 3 at home this season. Looking at the Philadelphia side of things, I think Joel Embiid is going to be very popular. I'll get to him in a couple minutes. But the guy that I really want to talk about here is Ben Simmons. He's been on a tear recently. Over his last 5 games, averaged 48 fantasy points per game on 19 points, 8.4 assists, and 10 rebounds. He does have he shot pretty well in that time as well. 61.9% from the floor, has notched 2 triple-doubles over that span. Pretty safe floor and pretty safe upside, even in a tough matchup against Boston. The Celtics are a team that has struggled to defend primary ball handlers, especially guys on the wings, because they can create some separation on some screens and get some drives. And Simmons leads the team with 9.1 drives per game. His DraftKings price at 8,400, just simply too cheap, I think, to overlook. He's 9,500 on FanDuel. I like him in tournaments over there, but DraftKings, he's a very, very strong cash and tournament option. Worth noting, Boston has ranked 15th in defensive efficiency to point guards on the season, allowing them to shoot 44% from the floor. I have a lot of interest in Ben Simmons here tonight. Ben Simmons, again, 8,400, coming off a strong stretch of games, and actually had a really strong game against the Celtics earlier this season when these two teams met. He had 19 points and 15 rebounds to go along with 8 assists. Looking at the rest of this team, Jimmy Butler can be used in GPPs. Just the lack of consistency concerns me. He is really cheap, 7K on DraftKings, 7,800 on Fanduel. Boston does rank first in defensive efficiency to small forwards. That's concerning. But again, Jimmy Butler is someone that I think we can look at in tournaments tonight. JJ Redick rarely offers a ton of upside, but comes in at just a very affordable 5.1K price on DraftKings, 5.6 on Fanduel. Strong cash game option despite the tough matchup. He's been kind of a model of consistency. Has taken double-digit field goal attempts in all but 2 of his 34 games this season, has topped 25 fantasy points in 18 of those games. So pretty impressive there. If Wilson Chandler misses this game, Mike Muscala could be a strong value play. Did let everyone down last time. He's up to 4,200 on DraftKings. That's a little unappealing. 39 on FanDuel. He can be used as a punt option. But I would rather look at maybe a Furkan Korkmaz or someone like that as a value option. And then Joel Embiid, I did mention him. He has topped 50 fantasy points just twice over his last 10 games, but he's still worthy of GPP and cash consideration in this spot. He's just so cheap on DraftKings at 9,500. He's 10-3 on FanDuel, a little less appealing. But since Baines went down, Boston ranking 23rd in defensive efficiency to centers, allowing 22.6 points, 16.2 rebounds, and 53% shooting over that span. They're also giving up 45.7 rebounds per game to opponents, which is a pretty big boost to Embiid here today. And I have to apologize in advance. There's going to be people coming in and out of my house. My dogs might start barking like crazy at some point here soon, but I'll try to have this podcast done recording before that happens. Looking at the Boston side of things, the Sixers, just a league average defense in the month of December. They're posting a defensive rating of 108.3. They can be targeted a few different ways tonight, and that starts with Kyrie Irving, who I mentioned has had some interesting home road shooting splits, but Irving has topped 20 points in 7 of the last 10 games. The return of Horford does slightly lower his upside, but I still think he's a strong bet for 40-plus fantasy points tonight, and he's pretty appealing, again, especially on DraftKings where everyone is underpriced at 8,100, but 9,200 on FanDuel is somewhat appealing as well. It's a really, really solid matchup here tonight for Kyrie Irving. The Sixers have really struggled at times against point guards this season. Marcus Smart, someone that I have interest in cash, consistently playing in upper 20s in minutes, has topped 20 fantasy points in 7 of his last 10. Philly has been tough against shooting guards this season, but he still has a pretty solid floor because of the stocks, the blocks, the steals and blocks that he can provide. Can be used in cash, but I do prefer him a little bit more in tournaments. Jason Tatum, my second favorite way to get exposure to the Celtics here outside of Kyrie Irving. Philly has been atrocious against power forwards this season. Jason Tatum, 6K on DraftKings, 6,800 on FanDuel. I like him in cash and tournaments tonight. They're allowing power forwards to shoot 47.8% from the floor to go along with 21.4 points and 12.4 rebounds per game. They're 22nd in defensive efficiency. Has been consistent, topping 30 points in 8 of the last 10 games. Does have upside here. We saw it last time these teams played. He only played 28 minutes, but went 9 of 17 from the floor with 23 points and 41 fantasy points. Jason Tatum, 6K, really, really fair price. So is Marcus Morris at 5.9K. I have a lot of interest in him as well. He's 6K on FanDuel. He's perfectly fine in all formats. And then Al Horford, if we find out he's not on a minutes limit, Al Horford at 5,700, really, really appealing. I have a feeling he's going to be limited to about 25 minutes, which makes him usable in tournaments, but I would probably be looking elsewhere, and his return hurts Daniel Tice, Robert Williams. I don't mind Gordon Hayward or Jaylen Brown in tournaments. They're just not very appealing at their price tags. Hayward would be the most appealing at 5K, gonna get mid to upper 20s in minutes, but I think I can find better plays elsewhere. Moving on to the evening games, Lakers at Golden State. This game, Golden State 9-point favorites, 234 over under. Durant dealing with a little bit of ankle injury. He's probable. Tyson Chandler is questionable. Jacob Evans is questionable. JaVale McGee is doubtful, and Michael Beasley is out. Klay Thompson mired in a little bit of a three-point shooting slump, 7 of 36 from three over the last 6 games. Tyson Chandler, if he plays, could hurt Ivica Zubac just a little bit, but given how well Zubac has played the last 2 games in the starting lineup, it may not matter. He's gone 16 of 22 from the floor with 15 rebounds, 35 points, 6 blocks, and 2 steals over the past 2 games. Has topped 30 points in each. Likely to be very, very popular at his price point. He's 4,400 on DraftKings. Over on Fanduel, he is... Oops, I pulled up Golden State. Let me pull up the Lakers. Over on FanDuel, he's 3,500. I don't know how you can fade him at 3,500 in this spot, even if you don't know the status of Chandler ahead of time. I think you just lock in Zubac. But like on DraftKings, I'm fine if you want to use Zubac, but I still have a little bit of interest in like Brook Lopez over him, just as an ownership pivot, and the fact that Golden State can play small, which could hurt Zubac a little bit. That being said, at his expected ownership in cash, I think you can make a case to just locking him in and moving on. And that's fine. The return of Rajon Rondo and Brandon Ingram has really hurt the upside of Kuzma and Ball. Both really somewhat unappealing outside of like large field tournaments. Kuzma is still playing a ton of minutes, has topped 37 in 3 straight, so there's a possibility he could see a few minutes at center, which could give him a little bit of a boost. So again, in large field tournaments, 6,400 for Kyle Kuzma. It's not the worst idea in the world. 6,800 on FanDuel. I'd probably be looking elsewhere, but again, it's worthy in large field tournaments. I have a lot of interest in Brandon Ingram in the spot though. Ingram just 5,300 on DraftKings, 6K on FanDuel. It's a pretty strong spot for him. He's been pretty solid in his first 2 games back, 33, 37 minutes. Not the best matchup against Memphis, but very, very intriguing here. Warriors allowing opponents to shoot 67.5% at the rim this season. Ingram, 43% of his shots come at the rim. It's a pretty solid spot for him. I think I'm going to take some shots on him in cash and tournaments tonight. Rondo's fine, I think, in tournaments. Just really cheap, 4,500 on DraftKings, 4,900 on FanDuel. I'm pretty interested in Rondo at this price. Does find himself getting up for these types of games, so I wouldn't hate taking a shot on him. And then Josh Hart has still been playing consistent minutes the last couple of games with the return of Rondo and Ingram. Just a guy who can get out in transition, get you some steals, get you some things like that. The Warriors do struggle in transition. I do like him a little bit as a tournament option on DraftKings and a value punt over on FanDuel. I would expect LeBron James to be pretty hyped up for this game. 10-1 on DraftKings, still way too cheap here. I'm probably going to be looking elsewhere because there's guys like Kevin Durant who are even cheaper, but it's LeBron James. I don't really need to say a whole lot. He's lower down on the list when it comes to ranking the studs, but it's a pretty strong spot here for LeBron James tonight. Looking at the Warriors side of things, it is worth noting, 43.3 minute sample size with LeBron, Ball, Ingram, Kuzma, and Zubac on the floor. 1.77 fantasy points per minute for LeBron James. So it's a pretty strong number, even though his usage rate is 20% in that time. Looking at the Warriors side of things, I have to start with Draymond Green here first. Draymond Green at 6,300 on DraftKings, 7,300 on FanDuel. A little bit less appealing on FanDuel, but 6,300 on DraftKings. I don't know how he's not 80% owned tonight. It's just insane. The fast-paced game, rebounding upside, steals, blocks upside. Draymond Green should go bananas in this spot. Projects to be one of the best values of the day for me, coming in right around 40 fantasy points over on DraftKings. He's been a little bit better the past couple games. Still struggling with the shot a little bit, shooting 38.6% from the field over the last couple of games, over the last 5 games. But double-digit rebounds, that's pretty appealing. The assist number is starting to get up there a little bit. And double-digit points in back-to-back games. 5 steals and 1 block against the Clippers. I could see him putting up another line just like that here tonight. Lakers giving up 46.3 rebounds and 51.6 points per game in the paint. Could see some minutes at the center spot too, which would be a pretty big boost to him. Looking at the other guys in this one, Lonzo Ball, people may not realize, like, Lonzo Ball has been phenomenal on defense this season. And the Lakers actually against point guards this season, they rank third in defensive efficiency. They're holding them to just 39.8% from the floor and 32.8% from three. That has me concerned when I'm talking about Steph Curry, especially at 9,700 on FanDuel. 9K on DraftKings, I'm perfectly fine with him in tournaments. I'm probably going to be looking elsewhere. He'd be down the list a little bit for me with guys like Damian Lillard, who's just ridiculously underpriced. But Stephen Curry, I think, goes overlooked in this spot. He's a pretty strong tournament option, can light it up against just about anybody. Doesn't really matter who's defending him. He's freaking insane. Shooting guards have torched the Lakers, shooting 44% from 44% from the floor, 38% from three. I mentioned Klay Thompson being a guy that has not shot the ball very well from three recently. Looking at these games, it's pretty gross. 2 of 6, 0 of 5, 0 of 4, 1 of 4, 4 of 12, 0 of 5. But we know what Klay Thompson's capable of, and the last time we went through this where he shot 22.6% from the field over the last 5 games, but is, a 34, 35, 36 career. I don't even know. Let's see. What's his career 3-point? Let me pull up what his career 3-point numbers are. Because, again, we've been through this where Klay Thompson goes through a slump and then they make it an effort to get him going, and he goes absolutely bananas. Yeah, 41.6% career 3-point shooter. One of these games he's going to go bananas. It definitely could happen on Christmas Day. I would love to get some tournament exposure to Klay Thompson at 6,700 tonight. Pretty strong option here. Can be used in cash on FanDuel too. Again, shooting guard, kind of a weird spot over there tonight. Lakers rank 6th in defensive efficiency to small forwards. They're holding them to just 44.6% from the field, 35.8% from three. But the pace of this game obviously benefits Kevin Durant, who's excellent in paced up, transition heavy games. Absolutely matchup proof. Just insanely cheap, especially over here on DraftKings at 9,300. Just ridiculously way too cheap. It's going to be a very high scoring night on DraftKings. So I really like Kevin Durant here. Kevon Looney is my preferred value option here, given he should be back in the starting lineup. They did start Dribble last game, but Kevon Looney, the guy I think has the safer floor. Still played about the same amount of minutes as Dribble last game. But I like Kevon Looney a little bit more in cash, Dribble in tournaments. Looney is going to be the lower owned option in this spot tonight. Moving on, final game of the night, Portland at Utah. Utah 6-point favorites, 214 over under. Utah side of this game, there's a couple guys in here that I have some interest in. I think we should talk about Rudy Gobert. Has been able to, has posted 4 straight double-doubles, has 28 double-doubles on the season. We do know Portland is a team that does struggle at times against post big men. Gobert could absolutely feast here. He's been playing really well over the last couple of games. Again, he's going to be someone that's overlooked in this spot. He comes in at 7,200 on DraftKings. That's really affordable for Rudy Gobert. He is 8,600 on FanDuel. I have a lot of interest in him. Put up, 33 fantasy points in 30 minutes last time out. Not great, but I still think he is a fantastic option in this spot tonight. Ricky Rubio, the other guy, I think Rubio is going to garner a ton of ownership, coming in at 5,400 on DraftKings, 67 on FanDuel, given how well he's played the last 2 games. And one of those games against Portland put up 42 fantasy points in 27 minutes. Yeah, he's going to garner a little bit of ownership. I'm fine with it in cash. I'm fine with it in tournaments. Just know you're probably not going to get him at very low ownership. The guy I have the most interest in from the Utah side of this, and I'm a little bit sad that he started to heat up a little bit, is Joe Ingles. Joe Ingles, 5,700 on DraftKings, 6K on FanDuel. Last couple of games, over 3 straight games, over 30 fantasy points. One of those games against Portland, 34 fantasy points. I highlighted him in that game actually, because the Portland Trailblazers have just allowed opposing small forwards to torch them from 3-point range. They're allowing 44.1% on 3-point attempts. We know Ingles, a guy, is going to take a handful of 3-point attempts. Joe Ingles, one of my favorite tournament options on the entire slate, and I have a feeling he's going to come in really, really low ownership. Jay Crowder, someone that you can look at in cash. Most nights going to get you mid to upper 20s and minutes, and probably going to get you 20 plus fantasy points. Most nights, so I have some interest in him. Kyle Korver, an interesting Fanduel punt option tonight. The Portland side of this game, not terribly appealing unless you really want to get some exposure to Damian Lillard, who at 7,800 is just way too fucking cheap tonight. Excuse my language. Utah allowing opponents to shoot 37.3% on above the break threes this season. Yeah. Damian Lillard shooting 60.6% from 3 over the last 5 games. That is insane. He did have a little bit of a down game against Utah last time out. Just 19 points, 37 fantasy points. But at 7,800, I don't know how you don't love Damian Lillard in this spot. He should be able to put up a really strong effort here. Going to be someone that I have a ton of exposure to tonight. Outside of him, McCollum always a strong option against teams that can't defend in the mid-range. He takes 43% of his shots there. Utah allowing opponents to shoot 43% in both the paint and the mid-range. He's fine in tournaments. Not someone that I really like in cash. Turner's a fine tournament option as well. Evan Turner continues to be a guy that gets you pretty strong return on his salary most nights. Had a couple down games, some of these bad games, against like Memphis and Dallas, not greatest of spots, but he's someone that I do have interest in cash. And then Yusuf Nurkic. Nurkic has been playing really well recently. Over 35 fantasy points in 3 of the last 4. Had a strong game against Utah last time out. Utah, a team that has not been very good against opposing centers for the majority of this season. I prefer him in tournaments, but if he fits your lineup in cash, you could definitely make a case for that. But that does it. That's the entire slate. Just over 35 minutes for that. I want to wish everyone once again a Merry Christmas and good luck in all your contests. I will be back on Wednesday. We have a pretty large slate on Wednesday, so I will see you then.